and welcome to the Bhagavatam. Today we're going to talk about Ram, Sri Ram, and the Ramayana in brief. We're not going to get into super big detail, but this is going to be an overview. So on January 22nd, 2024, the Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, consecrated the Ram deity at the newly constructed temple in Ayodhya. Ayodhya is the birthplace of Sri Ram. This event heralds a civilizational resurgence of the Vedic way of life that has been shamed, suppressed, and subjugated for over 1,000 years. It all began with the Islamic genocide in India around 900 CE, when Muslim invaders relentlessly kept attacking India. By 1200 CE, they had captured much of North India and made Delhi as their capital. And from the 13th to 18th centuries, over 80 to 200 million Hindus were brutally killed. No one talks about this. But these are the rough estimates, 80 to 200 million Hindus. That's about 7 to 10 to 15 times more people than were killed by Hitler. Hitler apparently killed between around 10 to 12 million people. That's a lot. And it's made a big deal of. But there are no monuments to these 80 to 200 million Hindus that were brutally killed by the Muslims. In fact, all over India, there are cities named after these very tyrants. There are roads named after them. There are all kinds of facilities given to those who were converted by the edge of the sword. These Muslim invaders raped, kept in harems, enslaved and sold off millions of women. They converted and forcefully married them. Nalanda, which had one of the biggest libraries in the world at that time, was burned and razed to the ground. And yet a town exists in the name, right next to Nalanda, exists right in the name of the person who burned that greatest of all libraries. Temples all across India were destroyed and mosques were built over them. Deities of the temples were taken and put in under the steps of those mosques so that the Muslims who went to pray would step on the deities that were worshipped by the Hindus. And millions of Hindus were converted to Islam with the option to convert or die. In fact, almost 99% of the 200 million Muslims in India today are descendants of Hindu families that were forcibly converted to Islam. Yet the world is silent to these atrocities. In fact, often they're in denial that they even happened. Here is a writing from someone called Brajadulal Chattopadhyay. He writes, and this is when he was a person who was there at that time. He writes, I very much lament for what happened to the groves of Madhura. The coconut trees have all been cut, and in their places are to be seen rows of iron spikes with human skulls dangling at the points. In the highways which were once charming with anklet sounds of beautiful women are now heard ear-piercing noises of Brahmins being dragged, bound in iron fetters. The waters of Tambraparni, this is in the south of India, which were once white with sandal paste, are now flowing red with the blood of cows slaughtered by miscreants. Earth is no longer the producer of wealth, nor are there timely rains. The god of death takes his undue toll of those who have survived the Muslims. The Kali age now deserves deepest congratulations for being at the zenith of its power. Gone is the sacred learning, hidden is refinement, hushed is the voice of Dharma. So the Ram temple in the city of Ayodhya, the birthplace of Ram, was destroyed in 1528 by the order of Babur, the Mughal emperor, and a mosque called the Babri Masjid was built on top of it. The dispute to rebuild the temple has taken 500 years, and finally it was approved by the Supreme Court of India in 2019, after evidence provided by the Archaeological Survey of India proved the existence of ruins of the ancient temple under the mosque. The Ram temple is still under construction and will be the largest temple in India. It will be 161 feet high and cover an area of 28,000 square feet. The foundation is made of sacred soil from 2,587 sacred sites all over India. No iron or steel has been used. It is built entirely of stone. I wondered why. And I found out it's because iron will decay, will rust, will rot, but stone will not. And every brick here bears the inscription Sri Ram. So let's get started to understand who is Ram, what is the Ramayana, and why is this so important to us. I'll start by showing you some pictures of the temple, and then we'll get into the story. So that's the newly constructed Ram temple. Actually, it's still under construction. This is the deity in the temple of Ram Lalla. This is Ram at the age of 5 as a child. So the Bhagavatam, this is the 9th canto, 10th chapter, talks about how the grandson of King Khatvanga was Raghu, and his grandson was King Dasharath, the father of Sri Ram. So that's why it's called the Raghu dynasty, because that was the lineage. When the Supreme Godhead appeared as Ram, he came with his brothers Lakshman, Bharat, and Shatrughan. All of them were expansions of Vishnu, or Vishnu Tattva, and not Jiva Tattva. I'll explain in a moment. His wife, Mother Sita, is the expansion of Lakshmi, the goddess of fortune. So we've been talking about this for a while, the incarnations of the divine, the supreme being, the supreme Godhead. In the Brahma Samhita, Brahma, the creator of this universe, it's delegated to him to do that, says Advaitam Achyutam Anadim Anantarupam. That means that the Supreme Being or Vishnu has unlimited forms, such as Ram, Lakshman, Bharat, and Shatrughan. He says that in the further text as well. Ramadi Murti Shukala Niyamena Tishna. So the Supreme Being is Advaitam. He has no other, right? He is non-dual. He is Achyutam, he is Anadim, he is the oldest, and he is Anantarupam, he has unlimited forms. Anantarupam. So we have this form right now, right? But we too have had many forms. We have had many bodies that we've been in. We've lived many lifetimes, and we too have had many forms. If we can have many forms, and each of these unique and each of these very, very different from the previous one, if we can have so many forms, why not God? That which created us is certainly capable of doing the very things that we can do. Why could it not? After all, we were created in the image of God. So why would God not be able to do what we can do? Now, so these forms the brothers of Ram, Bharat, Shatrughan, Lakshman, they are all equally incarnations of Vishnu. This is a very unique phenomenon that the Supreme Being now incarnates with four clones of himself, but all different. All different. These are not, they're the same and yet different. They all perform various pastimes and various leelas, as you will see in the story as we go forward. But keep in mind that Lakshman, although he will act as if he's serving Ram, and Bharat will act as if he's serving Ram, they're all no different than Ram. And the wife of Ram, Sita, is the eternal consort, Lakshmi, the goddess of fortune. So all of them, the sons at least, became the children of King Dasharath in response to prayers by the demigods. So let me first show you some pictures of the baby Ram. And I want you to contemplate something very interesting. Being the parent of God. You know, in many faiths, we have the idea of God as our Father, Father God. That's a wonderful thing. A child takes shelter of the Father. A child is protected by the Father. A child can go to the Father and say, Father, I need this and I need that. But if God is your child, now what happens? You're going to protect him. You're going to be worried about his needs. Do you see how much more deep and more intense that relationship would be? A child demands, but as a parent, you're a giver. You give not only your love, but you give your heart, your soul to your child. You give everything you have to your child. And so it is when someone accepts God as their child. Many of these great souls prayed for a long time, for tremendous austerities, to have that good fortune. So here we see Ram with his parents. And then with his brothers and the co-wives of the king Dasharath. He had 3 wives and 4 sons. And then this is Ram with his brothers. And this is the king Dasharath with his son Ram. And this is the grown-up Ram, along with his wife Sita, with Hanuman. I'm going to tell you a lot more about Hanuman and his brothers. So the activities of Ram, the husband of Mother Sita, have been described in many versions of Ramayana across India. The original was written by Valmiki. It consists of 480,000 words in 24,000 verses, and it is 4 times the size of the Illiad. The Ramayana, Mahabharata, and Puranas are referred to in the Vedas as itihas, or history, which is literally translated as thus it happened. And they are written by great sages, not by poets. They're not written by literary personalities who wrote fiction. They're written by great sages, people who lived by the truth, who would never speak a lie, ever, for any reason. That was their dharma. And such beings spoke of this as thus it happened. Itihasya. Sri Rama appeared on earth around 12,209 BCE, around 14,000 years ago, according to researchers like Nilesh Oak and others who have looked into the various astrological references mentioned in Valmiki Ramayana. Now, Western scholars, of course, don't like to believe any of this. They don't want to look at the astrology. They want to go by whatever they want to make up. And they claim it was written around 7th to the 4th century CE, that is to say BC. No, 7th century CE to the 4th century AD or CE. But there is in the Srimad Bhagavatam, which was written, and we know this, which was written around 3000 BCE, it is stated that Ramayana is well known to King Parikshit. So King Parikshit, to whom this Srimad Bhagavatam is being spoken, Sukhadeva says to him, "You know of the Ramayana. You have heard it many times, and therefore I'm only going to tell you a summary of it." So it was well known to the King Parikshit at 3000 BCE, 5000 years ago. You see, the evidence is right there, but people don't want to hear it. As we have seen throughout the Srimad Bhagavatam, the Supreme Being Vishnu appears millennium after millennium to establish Dharma. What else would God be doing, anyways? Sitting up in the clouds and, on the throne and judging people? No. He takes an active role in what's going on out here. Why? Because he cares. Why does he care? Because on one hand, you say we're his children, you say we're his creation, and on the other hand, all he's going to do is sit and judge us? No, he cares. He cares to set things right. If there's a mess on the earth, he steps in. He's active. He takes a role if and when necessary. Not all the time, that would be too much interference. But when necessary, when things have gone too far. At that time, usually the devas, the demigods, will call on him, and he will then descend with a certain incarnation. And all those incarnations are predicted in advance. There are many now who go around calling themselves God, avatar, incarnation, blah, blah, blah. But that's nonsense. They're not written about in the Vedas. And all the genuine incarnations, including Ram and Krishna, and even Buddha and Chaitanya, have all been talked about in the Vedas and predicted their arrival, their purpose, what they will do, why they will come. So Vishnu takes many forms, and in those forms he at times comes as a fish, as a tortoise, as a boar, as a dwarf, as a half lion, half man, and then as the King Ram. This is that next incarnation. We've been hearing about all the others, but now we're coming into where he's showing you the ideal king, a rajarshi, a raja, a king. Raja means king, and rishi means saint, a saintly king who is there to establish the principles of Dharma, who lives by those principles above his self-interest. Imagine having politicians like that. Not politicians who are cheaters and liars, who then need to be dragged to court for their cheating and their lies, and who are now popular and voted for. Not people who are weak and spineless, not people who are unable to uphold the principles of Dharma, but rather someone who stands by them as more important than life itself, more important than his own family, more important than his children, more important than his wife, more important than himself. Now we're going to talk about Ram's way of ruling, and it's controversial. It's unheard of. People don't buy into it, don't accept it, because we live in a society where everybody's selfish and everybody's out for themselves. So when you have a selfless king, a saintly king, his behavior is going to seem very strange to people. But that'll come up in our next episode. This time we're just going to kind of go through the preamble to that, the initial stages of the story of Ram, the history of Ram. So the word Ramayana is a combination of two words, Ram and Ayan. In the Atharva Veda, Ram means dark or black and is related to the word Ratri, which means darkness or stillness of night. In the Mahabharata, Ram is shown to mean pleasing, pleasant, charming, lovely, beautiful. I guess we're talking about the beautiful and lovely night. Anyways, it refers to the most powerful being of all. And Ayan refers to the travel or journey. Thus, Ramayana means Ram's journey. Besides the many versions of Ramayana in Indian languages, there are Buddhist and Jain adaptations. There are also Ramayana can be found in Cambodia, in Indonesia, in the Philippines, in Thailand, in the Lao versions, the Burmese versions, the Nepali versions, the Maldivian, Cambodian, Vietnamese, Tibeto-Chinese, and Malay versions of the Ramayana. The story was written by Valmiki, who was a bandit. Valmiki killed people and stole from them. One day, this bandit, Valmiki, was in the process of holding up a group of sages, wise sages. Didn't really have anything, but he was going to kill them anyways. He's just like, yeah, that's what I do. And they said to him, all right, no problem, you can kill us. That we're not afraid of death. But do one thing. Before you do that, please answer a few questions. Why do you do what you do? He says, well, I do it to support my family. This is my duty to my family, so I'm just doing what I need to do to survive. And they said, okay, well, then in that case, please go to your family and ask them if they will be willing to take on the karma that you're going to inherit because of your actions. You've been killing people, and these very people will in future kill you. You've been stealing from them, and they will in future lifetimes steal from you. Would your family members be willing to share the burden of the karma that you are incurring? So Valmiki went back to his family and to his wife, and she was furious at him. What the hell? That's not my business. You do what you do to support your family. That's your business. I'm taking care of the home and the kids. Get out of here. She picked up a rolling pin and chased him out of the house. So Valmiki went back to the sages and he said, you know what? They're not willing to take any responsibility for my actions. I want this all alone. I don't want to have to go through that. That is horrible. So they said, well, you should purify yourself. And he said, well, how do I do that? And he said, and they said to him, you should chant the name of Ram. And he says, I can't do, I don't know how to do that. Ram, Ram. He just couldn't get it out of his mouth even. So they said, all right, you are engaged in killing, right? He says, yep. And the word for death is Mara, M-A-R-A. So why don't you chant Mara, 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 Mara? So he began chanting this Mara, 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 Mara. But if you look at it, when you flip those words around, it's Ram, Ram, Ram. And soon that's what started coming out of his mouth. Ram, 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 Ram. And as he chanted, he became purified. And as he became purified, he became highly evolved because he kept doing this for years and years and years, just constantly, non-stop chanting the names of Ram. Ultimately, he reached such a high level of spiritual evolution that it was Brahma who called on him to write down the story of Ram. To write down, he would receive the information and he would write it down. And this is what he wrote. It is called the Valmiki Ramayana. It is the first Ramayana that was written. And it was written around the time when Ram was there on this planet. Ram's father was known as King Dasharath. And he had 3 wives, Kaushalya, Kaikai, and Sumitra. None of them were able to bear him a child. So he performed a fire sacrifice to Vishnu. This is how people did things back then. He performed a fire sacrifice to Vishnu, and thereafter each of his wives had a son. Ram was born to Kaushalya. He was the oldest. Bharat was born to Kaikai, and Lakshman and Shatrughan were born to Sumitra. Before the birth of Ram and his brothers, the Devas had been petitioning Brahma and Vishnu to deal with Ravan, the king of the Rakshasas, of the demons, who was terrorizing the universe. So this was the hidden, deeper significance of Ram's appearance, was to deal with Ravan. Who was Ravan? Well, there's a big story around that. If you remember earlier, we talked about the 2 gatekeepers of Vaikuntha who had been cursed by the 4 Kumars, the 4 boys, the sages, the sons of Brahma. They were the gatekeepers of the spiritual world of Vaikuntha. They had not permitted those 4 sages to enter, and therefore those sages had cursed them. And a sort of truce was reached whereby they were given the choice that they could come to earth for 3 lifetimes as asuras, as demons, or 7 lifetimes as human beings. And they chose to come as 3 lifetimes as demons, wanting to get back out of this physical, material world as soon as possible. Now, Vishnu, of course, had a deeper plan behind it. He knew he's going to be incarnating. There's going to be problems that he has to deal with. And he wanted to have some good opponents, someone of his caliber, someone he could have a good fight with, someone he could have a good leela with, a good story with. After all, we all love a good story, don't we? And so does God. So these two then appeared as Hiranyaksha, who then Vishnu attacked, killed as the boar incarnation, and Hiranyakashipu, who Vishnu killed as the Narsingha, half lion, half man. Then they appeared as Ravan and Kumbhakaran. This is the next time they've appeared, these two. And this time now Ram has appeared to kill both of them. And in the future, they will appear in the time of Krishna as Kans. When Ram was 16 years old, the sage Vishwamitra came to the court of Dasharath in search of help against the demons who were disturbing sacrificial rites. He chose Ram and Lakshman to receive instructions and supernatural weapons to fight with these asuras or demons. So here are some pictures for you. That's the sage Vishwamitra taking Ram and Lakshman with him. While Ram was with his guru, they heard that King Janak has a bow that no one has been able to string. The king had declared that whoever strings the bow will win the hand of his daughter Sita. The Srimad Bhagavatam says in the assembly where Mother Sita was to choose her husband, in the midst of the heroes of this world, he broke the bow belonging to Shiva. So this bow that was to be strung, he had to string the bow, originally belonged to Shiva and had been given to the king Janak. It was so heavy that it was carried by 300 men. But Sri Ram bent and strung it, in fact, broke it in the middle, just as a baby elephant breaks a stick of sugarcane. Thus he achieved the hand of Mother Sita, who was equally as endowed with transcendental qualities of form, beauty, behavior, age, and nature. Indeed, she was the goddess of fortune, Lakshmi. So there's a lot of discrepancy around this because I first read that there was no mention of a Swayamvar. Swayamvar is this competition for who's going to marry the daughter of the king. There would be many suitors who would come, and there would be a contest for them, and whoever won that contest would then marry the princess. And this is what happened in the case of Arjun and his marriage to Draupadi. That is, of course, later in the Mahabharata. So now there was a mention by many people that this is not there in the Valmiki Ramayana. There is no mention of there being any kind of Swayamvar contest of this nature. And while that might be true, here in the Srimad Bhagavatam, it is mentioned. And so I'm inclined to take this as definitive. And that therefore there was a Swayamvar, therefore there were other people who were also wanting to marry Sita, and it was during that gathering that Ram came and picked up the bow of Shiva. All right, so the wedding of Ram and Sita was celebrated with great festivity by her father. And then Ram, Lakshman, Sita, and Guru Vashisht all returned to the palace of Ram's father in Ayodhya. Now, while returning from Sita's home after gaining her at the assembly of competitors, this is what the Bhagavatam says, Ram met Parshuram. Parshuram is also another incarnation of Vishnu who was also present here, and he was very proud. He had rid the earth of the royal order of kings 21 times, but this time he was defeated by Ram. So here are some pictures again of Ram picking up the bow, and of Sita holding a garland there to place around him because she knows she's going to marry him. And there is Ram breaking the bow, and then Sita garlanding him. Ram's father, Dasharath, was getting older, and he wanted to crown Ram as his heir. Everyone in the kingdom loved Ram. They were thrilled. The king's wives were also delighted. But on the eve of the coronation, Kaikeyi, the mother of Bharat, Ram's brother Bharat, right? So Kaikeyi was perhaps the middle wife. She was provoked by her wicked maidservant Manthara to claim the two boons that Dasharath had long ago granted her. There was a situation in which Manthara, I'm sorry, not Manthara, but Kaikeyi had saved the life of King Dasharath. They were out somewhere hunting, and she had acted in such a way that the king's life was saved. And the king had then granted her two boons, and he had said, anything you want, I will grant you that. So she said, no, not now, later. Now, the maidservant of Kaikeyi reminded her that, look, Ram is going to become the king. Your son will be nowhere. You will be nowhere. So she brought jealousy. She brought envy into the heart of Kaikeyi. And then Kaikeyi went to the king and demanded that Ram be exiled. Ram, who was the favorite of everyone in the kingdom. Ram, who was the most worthy, the most deserving, the most noble, the most pious, be exiled into the forest for 14 years. And the succession passed to her son, Bharat. The grief-stricken King Dasharath, bound by his word, acceded to Kaikeyi's demands. You see, this was a culture in which when a person gave their word, they didn't back off, back down. In today's time, people give their word. Till death do us part. They say it, they declare it. They give their word to be faithful, to be loyal, and then break their word as easily as they gave it. But this was not that caliber of people. This was the caliber of people who lived by Dharma, and Dharma meaning with integrity, with true sense of righteousness. And once they gave their word, there was no going back, even if it meant death. Ram could have opposed his father, but he absolutely didn't. He was the embodiment of Dharma, and he accepted his father's reluctant decree with absolute submission and calm self-control. Here's a picture of King Dasharath being approached by his wife Kaikeyi. And here he is after the fact, devastated, completely devastated. In fact, Dasharath, after Ram left, did not survive. He died. And here we have Ram, Lakshman, and Sita leaving for the forest. So the father, rather Ram, actually asked Sita to remain in Ayodhya, in the capital, in the palace. But she convinced him to take her with him in exile. She was refused to stay on. She was a princess. She had never lived in the forest. Ram had still lived in the forest with his guru. But Sita had never lived in the forest, had never been in that life of austerity and hardship. But she says, no way, no way. If you're going, I'm going. So she convinced him to take her with him in exile. Lakshman, Ram's brother, also resolved to follow his brother into the forest. Ram, it is said in the Bhagavatam, left behind his kingdom, opulence, friends, well-wishers, residents, and everything else, just as a liberated soul gives up his life. And he went to the forest with Sita and his brother Lakshman. After Ram's departure, King Dasharath, unable to bear the grief, passed away. Meanwhile, Bharat, Ram's brother, Kaikeyi's son, who was supposed to now become the king, he had been on a visit to his maternal uncle, and he learnt about the events in Ayodhya, the capital. He came back rushing. He refused to profit from his mother's wicked scheming, and he went to the forest to visit Ram. He requested Ram to return and rule, but Ram was determined to carry out his father's orders, and he refused to return before the period of exile. So remember, he was in exile now for 14 years. Bharat then asked Ram for his shoes. He was wearing wooden shoes. And he took those with him and placed them on the throne. And he sat on the floor, ruling the kingdom in place of Ram. Once again, I have some pictures for you here. That is Bharat begging Ram to come back. And then when Ram just absolutely refuses, he asks for his shoes. That's he's holding Ram's shoes there. And then he carried those shoes on his head and brought them back. And then he did not live in the palace, but he lived in a cottage outside of the palace. But my brother is going to live in a cottage in the forest somewhere. Well, I'm going to do the same. And he put those shoes on the throne and worshipped them. And it is on behalf of Ram that he continued to rule, not as the king, but rather sitting on the floor at the feet of the throne. He continued to rule instead of his brother. Now, in the forest, Ram, Lakshman, and Sita built a cottage and lived off the land. They wore simple clothes and ate whatever they could find. They enjoyed the simple life. It was beautiful. One day they were visited by a rakshasi. So rakshas usually means a very demonic person, often a cannibalistic a person who eats humans as well. So her name was Suparnaka, and I will show you her pictures and so on. She was the sister of Ravan. Now she really found these brothers very handsome, and she tried to seduce them, but she failed. Ram said, well, I'm married. And Lakshman said, well, I am devoted to my brother. I'm not going anywhere. I'm not interested in marrying anyone. She took offense. She became very upset. And eventually, because she tried to kill Sita now, she said, if I kill Sita, then Ram will marry me. And so because she was trying to kill Sita, Lakshman stopped her, cut off her nose and ears. And when her brothers heard of this, they organized an attack in which 14,000 of her Rakshas friends, headed by Khara, Trishira, and Tushan, were defeated. Now, when Ravan heard of this, Ravan was her brother too, Ravan, who had 10 heads. It's a very interesting depiction of Ravan with his 10 heads. Was it a literal having of 10 heads, or did he have 10 voices in his head? And there was a recent movie where they tried to show this idea. And I don't find it so unreasonable, because many of us have many voices in our head. We have almost multiple personalities in our head talking to us. This one says this and that one says that. So it was with Ravan. Anyways, they say he had 10 heads. When Ravan heard about this and about the beautiful and attractive features of Sita, oh, his mind was agitated by lusty desires, and he went to kidnap her with the aid of his Rakshas friend Maricha, who could take any form. To distract Ram from his ashram, from his house, cottage, Maricha assumed the form of a golden deer and captivated Sita's attention. Entranced by the beauty of the deer, Sita pleaded with Ram to capture it. Ram, aware that this was the ploy of the asuras, of the demonic creatures, tried to dissuade Sita but couldn't her desire, and he chased the deer into the forest, leaving Sita under Lakshman's guard. So here's Suparnaka with her nose cut off, and here she is complaining to Ravan. After some time, Sita heard Ram calling out to her. So now Ram had gone to get the deer, and Sita is hearing Ram calling out to her. This was actually completely contrived. There was no real, Ram was not calling, but this was contrived by Ravan and part of his plan. So Sita heard Ram calling out to her, afraid for his life, and she insisted that Lakshman rush to his aid. Lakshman tried to assure her that Ram cannot be hurt and that it is best that he follow Ram's orders to protect her. Sita was hysterical and insisted that Lakshman go to help his brother. She started telling him things like, "You don't care about your brother. You don't care if he lives, if he dies." She started emotionally blackmailing Lakshman. Lakshman begrudgingly obeyed her wish. With the coast finally clear, Ravan appeared in the guise of an ascetic, requesting Sita's hospitality. I think I'll jump over to some pictures first and then continue. Let's see. So this is where Sita sees the deer, is a golden deer. And this is where Ravan comes to Sita as an ascetic. Now, meanwhile, Ram has gone, Lakshman has gone, and she's completely, exposed. In the Kritivas Ramayana, it is said that when Lakshman left Sita, he drew a line that no one could cross. This is often called the Lakshman Rekha, the line that no one could cross, and for which Sita was not supposed to step out. When Ravan approached begging for alms, she had to step past the line, and then he kidnapped her. However, this is not mentioned in the Valmiki Ramayana. Valmiki writes that Sita welcomed Ravan, thinking him to be a Brahmin, a saintly person, and she fed him and washed his feet. But Ravan was in disguise and had bad intentions. He kidnapped her and fled on his airplane to his capital Lanka, which is actually the present-day Sri Lanka. Now, as Ravan fled via the airways, a powerful bird, Jatayu, who was a great devotee of Sri Ram, confronted Ravan but was killed by him. Ram was deeply perturbed. He began to ask the trees, the plants, the animals of the forest if they had seen where Sita had gone. When he found the great bird Jatayu dying in the forest, Jatayu told Ram about what had happened and that Ravan was heading to Lanka. So I think I'll go and show you some pictures of that as well. Jatayu. And Jatayu attacking Ravan and Sita. I mean, rather attacking Ravan, not Sita. Ravan then made friends with the Vanar Sugriva. So who were the Vanars? A lot of people think the Vanars were monkeys. But I beg to differ. The Vanars were not monkeys. This is a big misunderstanding that has been around for quite some time. Many people think that Hanuman and his associates were monkeys. Valmiki uses the word Vanar, which comes from a combination of two Sanskrit words, Vana meaning forest and Nar meaning human. Very likely, they were humanoid species, different from Homo sapiens. They lived in the jungle. They were very intelligent, they were strong, and knew advanced warfare tactics. Valmiki wrote that they not only inhabited a part of southern India, but came from a faraway land where the sun shines for a very short time and the night is terribly long. One can speculate that perhaps they came from, or they may have originally come from Greenland or Scandinavia or somewhere in Europe. where the nights were very short and the days, I'm sorry, the nights were very long and the days were very short. Most likely they went extinct because there's no mention of them in the later epic Mahabharata. All right. So Ram then made friends with the Vanar Sugriva and helped him kill his tyrant brother Vali and anointed Sugriva as the king of Kishkinda. Sugriv then gave Ram a Vanar army, including Hanuman, the greatest devotee of Sri Ram, and they headed to the southernmost tip of India. So here are some pictures of the Vanar. Now, of course, they're being depicted here as sort of monkey-like, but I think they would have been a cross somewhere between apes and humans. Maybe they were the missing link. They were just simply a different species of humans or humanoids. So that's Hanuman, as shown by many of the artworks that you'll find. Many people think that Hanuman, they think of him as the monkey god. That's not true. It's not that we have monkey gods in Hinduism or in the Vedas. Hanuman was a devotee of Ram. He is not God. Okay? Be very clear. He is Ram Bhakta. He is a devotee of Ram. And he is, well, he's also known to be an incarnation of Shiva, but that's an extended incarnation. Hanuman is very, very special. He shows what devotion is really, the height of devotion. He is like completely devoted to Ram. So, we'll be hearing more about him. So when they arrived at the beach in the present-day Rameshwaram, that is at the tip of India, the very bottom of India, Ram, or Ramchandra as some say, fasted for 3 days, awaiting the arrival of the ocean personified. So he wanted now the Deva, the demigod in charge of the ocean, he wanted that Deva to appear. So he fasted for 3 days. And when the ocean did not come, Ram exhibited his pastime of anger. And simply by glancing over the ocean, all the living entities within it, including the crocodiles and sharks, were agitated by fear. Then the personified ocean fearfully approached Sri Ram and worshipped him. Falling at his lotus feet, he said, O all-pervading Supreme Person, we are dull-minded and did not understand who you are. But now we understand that you are the Supreme Being, the Master of the entire universe, the unchanging and original personality of Godhead. My Lord, you may use my water as you like to go to the abode of Ravan, who is this great source of disturbance. Please go kill him and thus regain your wife, Sita Devi. O great hero, please construct a bridge over my waters to spread your transcendental fame. Upon seeing this wonderfully uncommon deed of yours, all the great heroes and kings in the future will glorify you. The Vanar army then tried to build a bridge, but it was impossible. They then began to write the word Ram on the stones. Because, if you had heavy stones, they're just going to sink in the water. They're not going to. So they began to write the word Ram on the stones, and heavy rocks began to float on the ocean. This is the power of the name of Ram. Thus a bridge was built by the Vanar army, created from between Rameshwaram in India to Sri Lanka. This bridge was known as Ram Setu, but modern-day historians called it Adam's Bridge. If you want to look it up, you may. In recent times, it has been discovered submerged under the ocean. 2 American universities have studied it and declared that it is, in fact, man-made, well, Vanar-made, and at least 7,000 years old. So that's their conservative estimate. It might be older. It stretches for about 48 kilometers or 30 miles. Wow, that is a big bridge. It is called Adam's Bridge because it is near Adam's Peak, a place in Sri Lanka where it is believed in Islam that the biblical Adam fell to earth. He then crossed over to India via the bridge after his expulsion from the Garden of Eden. Okay, if this is true, then was the Garden of Eden in Sri Lanka? Or was he kind of transported from some other place where the Garden of Eden was and thrown into Sri Lanka and then crossed over to India? And if he did much of the civilization follow Adam's coming into India? And it just opens up a whole bunch of questions that I have no answers for. But this is what they believe in Islam. So I'll just leave it at there. Now, here are some pictures of Ram and the Vanar Sena building the bridge. And this is where they're writing the name Ram on each of the stones, and then those stones begin to float. And finally, when the bridge is built, they carry Ram and Lakshman on their shoulders into Lanka. While the bridge was being built, Hanuman flew across the ocean to Lanka. Now, Hanuman had this ability. He was the son of Vayu, the wind god, and had powerful mystical powers. As a child, he tried to fly towards the sun because he wanted to play with it like a ball. Fortunately, he had been stopped. Now, he flew towards Lanka to give Sita a message from Ram that they were going to be there soon. And Ram and his army were going to be there soon. Ravan wanted Sita to be with his wife. He wanted Sita to be his wife. But she had absolutely refused. So there's a big question asked, why didn't Ravan just force himself on her? Why didn't he just, rape her and have sex with her? It so happens that Ravan had been cursed, because he'd done that before to other women. He had been cursed by someone that if he forcibly took a woman, he would immediately die. So he dared not force himself on Sita, but kept trying to woo her. Hanuman met Sita in the Ashoka grove where she was kept prisoner. He gave her Ram's signet ring and the message that they were on their way. He offered to carry her back to Ram, but Sita refused. She instead gave him her comb as a token and insisted that Ram come himself and take her away and avenge the insult of the demon Ravan. So let's show you some more pictures of this. This is Hanuman approaching Sita in the Ashoka Vatika. And what happened next was that Hanuman was discovered, he was captured by Ravan's soldiers, and he was brought before Ravan. He then lectured Ravan to free Sita and told him that if he didn't, he would die. Instead, what Ravan had his people do is they had him set fire. They set fire to Hanuman's tail, but Hanuman escaped. And as he escaped, he killed many of Ravan's soldiers and began to jump from roof to roof with his burning tail. And he set fire to most of Ravan's golden city of Lanka. And finally, as he put his, subdued the fire on his tail in the ocean and then flew across the ocean back to Ram. So here are some pictures of that. And everyone fleeing here and there as the entire city is being set on fire. Hanuman is having a blast. All right, so with that, time is running out and we'll continue next week. We'll continue next week with the glorious tales of Sri Ram and about the battle that occurred between Ravan and Ram. I'd love to hear your thoughts, your questions, and see what you think. All right, let me flip over to the other side and see what we've got. Thank you, Cindy. Cindy writes, Rohit, your words are like raindrops upon a dry desert ground. This is how my soul. This is how my soul feels at times. Mm. Yes, this thought of having the Supreme Lord, the Supreme Being, as a child of your own, and what that kind of relationship would be like. We're going to see a lot more of that in the stories of Krishna, which is coming up in the 10th canto. We're on the 9th canto right now. Very soon we'll be hearing about Krishna and his Leela, his pastimes. And there you'll get to see a lot more of detail of what that relationship is like. The story, the way of having God as your child. It's fascinating, absolutely fascinating. Yes, you're right. People cannot grasp the idea of a saintly king in today's time. It's such a, I mean, we need people like Ram again. We need people who are saintly, who are not exploiting us, who are not taking advantage of us, who are not cheating us, who are not lying to us, who are not deceiving us, who are not doing things that are for their agenda, but rather who are concerned about what is best for the people, not just in this country, but in all countries. Hmm. She says, in my town, a Dungeons and Dragons game campaign is ongoing for months. We create fictitious names for the duration of the game. My introduction is, I am Leela, beyond the 10th dimension. Yes. In fact, this idea of Leela is very important. Not only does God have Leela and pastimes like this, but so do we. Our problem is we identify with the body we're in. Our problem is that we take this to be so serious and so real, when in fact, even our lives are actually lila, they're actually pastimes. We are here engaged in these wonderful pastimes with all kinds of ups and downs. And if you would begin to see your life like that, you will find it miraculous. You will find your life absolutely fascinating. It's like watching this amazing show on TV or in a serial or some kind of, soap opera or whatever. It's just fascinating how people behave, how we respond, how our mind responds. If you could just become the observer of all of that, you'd understand Leela. You'd understand what it is to be living a story which you believe so much to be true, but is no more true than the movies and the TV shows that you watch. This story now is just that, a story. If you've ever go back in time and think about your life, where is it? It's stored in your brain as memory, as a story, as a movie, as photographs. That's all it is. And so is this moment, and so is the next. And everything that is happening in this story of your life is simply another event in the movie. It will be. This moment it feels very real. This moment it feels like, oh my God, this is horrible, or this is great, or this is wonderful, or this is terrible. It feels like that, yes. Absolutely feels so real. But that's the brilliance of the medium. Now we're going from 2D movies to 3D movies to VR headsets where you can see those movies as real as if they were just happening right here. I happened to see the new VR headset by Apple. Well, they don't want to call it VR, they just call it Vision Pro or something like that. I went to check it out. And it was so realistic. It looked like, instead of photographs, it looked like people sitting right in front of me. Instead of videos, the videos looked like the person was walking right towards me. It had, what's her name, the singer? Okay. Anyway, there was this very famous singer, and just her name suddenly skipped. And she was like, she was standing right there singing. I could just touch her. It was that real. And so is this. This is another Vision Pro headset right here. This here, which we are wearing, these here, our ears are just microphones. This here is just the speaker from which we are emanating sound, like the loudspeaker. And this robotic organism that we live in is organic, not made of metal, but it's brilliant. Look at how it functions, look at how it works. It is fascinating. When you begin to understand that, you'll actually begin your spiritual life. You'll recognize that I am not this body, I am not this mind. You'll begin to observe it. You'll begin to understand its patterns. You'll begin to understand how it functions. And then you'll begin to be able to take charge of it and use it for what it was intended. It was intended not just to enjoy your senses, because that's only going to last for a short while. A few years, that ability to enjoy your senses is lost as you get older. But what will remain is the ever fresh, ever youthful, ever dynamic, ever wise soul, which is who you are. And when your mind is quiet, you'll experience it. You will experience yourself as the observer of the reality that is in front of you, including this very body. So, yes, and this is the Leela that Ram is showing us. And through his Leela, he's showing us that our life is a Leela as well. Yeah. So, thank you all for being here. Thank you for your presence. Thank you for your love, for all your support. Thank you so much. Your being here encourages me to be here. And please tune in next week. We'll be completing the story of Ram. I'll try and give you as much as I can within these 2 episodes. There is much more. It's actually such a vast thing. I could, if you did the Valmiki Ramayana, it would last us maybe a year to go through it at the rate of an hour every week. Yeah, it would take us a whole year to get through the Valmiki Ramayana. So trust me, it is huge. We're just condensing the story into very little. But if you're ever interested, the the books are available, the videos are available, and if you're really keen on getting them, just let me know and I'll look it up and find you the best version that can be bought. All right, take care, and I will see you next week.